She drained me of my blood, giving me the curse of eternal life, and thus making me a bloodthirsty creature of the night.
One thing about living in Santa Carla I never could stomach. All the damn vampires.
Nobody wants to see vampire killers anymore, or vampires either. Apparently all they want are demented madmen running around in ski masks, hacking up young virgins.
I'm engaged to Mina. And you're dead.
I'm not dead. I'm undead.
Well, I'm not unengaged.
You want to kill one? You drive a wooden stake right through his fucking heart.
Finger licking good. You can be young always, my friend. As we are now. But you must tell me. Will you come or no?
Hello out there, Weird Wide Webians, and welcome to the Weird Wide Web special 2-part vampire episode. I hope you enjoyed that collection of clips, my little tribute to some of our favorite vampire characters. Weird Wide Webians. Yes, you heard me right. I keep referring to my followers this way, and I really like it. I did consider Weird Wide Webites, but that doesn't have the ring to it. That sounds more cult-like, I think, kind of scary. So, you guys are my Weird Wide Webians. Do you mind? So anyway, this episode marks our 7th episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am your host, Lindsey B. Goddard, and I have got a fun episode for you guys. And I'd love to give you a little background information on how this episode came to be. It almost didn't come to be. I had announced the plans for a vampire episode on a previous podcast episode, but after a story got pulled, I started wondering, should I go forward with the vampire episode? Do people still care about vampires? And I started asking around. I started asking in the reading community and the writing community and the horror movie community. And the answer was a resounding yes. People still love vampires. They're alive and well, albeit undead. And so I posted asking my author friends if anyone could send me a unique vampire story I hadn't read before. And wow, I had to take that post down within a couple hours because I was receiving so many amazing stories. And I'd love to read some for you today. Oh God, who could that be? Every time I try to record a podcast, I get interrupted, I swear. If you'll excuse me for just one moment, I'll be right back. Hello?
Greetings, mortal. I mean, neighbor. I was wondering if I might borrow a pint of a cup of sugar, if you have it.
You know, I am fresh out of sugar, and I am actually right in the middle of something.
It's just that I have the most mouth-watering recipe in mind. If you were to invite me inside, I could tell you about it.
You know, guy, even if you looked like Brad Pitt from Interview with the Vampire, I would still have to tell you no right now because I am right in the middle of a podcast, so maybe some other time. Bye! Oh boy, how dumb does that bloodsucker think I am? Never invite a vampire into your home. Well, unless maybe they're your best friend, like in this first story by A.J. Brown. I'm a Hobo, She's a Vampire by A.J. Brown. I met my best friend on Halloween night in 1976. I was 6 and alone. We were at our grandparents' house that night. By we, I mean my brother Shane and I. By alone, I mean he had left me on Augusta Street to go smoke and hang out with his friends. Trick-or-treating is for kids, he said, knuckled my left shoulder, and walked off. His friends, the neighborhood jerk club, laughed. I watched them go. My brother had been my hero before he turned 11 a few months earlier. Suddenly he was too cool for me. That wasn't very nice. I turned to see a cute girl with long, kinky blonde hair. Her skin was white, and her eyes were the bluest blue I've ever seen. She was mesmerizing. I guess not, I said. Are you trick-or-treating? I looked at the pillowcase I had attempted to draw a scary pumpkin face on. It was more lame than scary. I guess so. Can I join you? Sure. I'm Adair. She put out a hand. I'm Jacob. I took her hand and shook it. It was cold. So what are you dressed as? She asked. I'm a hobo. We can't afford costumes. What about you? I'm a vampire, she responded, then asked, where do we start? Old Man McNally's house. He's creepy, but he gives good treats. I'm not going to say I fell in love with her right then, but by the end of the night I had. Both of us had a full bag of candy by the time we reached State Street. Now what? She asked. We sort the candy. Where? We can go to my grandmother's house and sort them on the porch, I said. She smiled, but she wasn't looking at me. She was looking across the street at the cemetery. How about in there? The graveyard? I asked. No, silly. It's a cemetery. Graveyards belong to churches. Cemeteries don't. Okay, but that's where the dead are buried. She shrugged. They're dead. They can't hurt you. Her logic made sense, but still I was unsure. My family is buried there, she said, in the mausoleum. We can do it there. I had never been in a cemetery at night, and the idea frightened me, but I didn't want to wuss out in front of Adair. So I said, okay. She led the way, unafraid and confident nothing bad would happen. The concrete mausoleum was huge, with a large steel door that opened easily. I was surprised to see the inside was lit with a white glow. We sat on the floor, sorted our candy, and talked. About what, I don't remember. At some point she stood. It's time to go. We left the mausoleum, walked through the cemetery, and stopped just outside the gates. It was nice to meet you, Jacob. It was nice to meet you, too. I put out my hand, but she didn't take it. She leaned forward and kissed me. Her lips were cold. Mine felt numb the rest of the night. She smiled. Happy Halloween, Jacob. Happy Halloween, Adair. Will I see you again? Yes. When? On Halloween, here, just after dark. But that's a year from now. I know, she said, smiled, and walked back into the cemetery. I didn't see her again for 364 days. On Halloween, I went to the cemetery just after dark. She stood at the gates, a white pillowcase in hand, her long blonde hair still kinky, her eyes still hauntingly beautiful. You came, she said. You said to. What are you this year? I'm still a hobo. She smiled. I'm still a vampire. That's how it was until I was 10. By then, Shane was 16, and the neighborhood jerk club had graduated to the neighborhood bully club. I was also dying. I didn't tell her because, well, I didn't know if we would see each other another Halloween. The doctors were not optimistic. I was often weak and exhausted, and if that was going to be the last time I saw her, I wanted it to be a good night. And it was, until we reached the cemetery with our bags full of candy. Before we could enter, Shane, Rich, Rob, and Billy circled us. What's this? Rich asked. He wasn't the meanest, but the mouthiest. 2 creepy lovebirds hanging out at the cemetery, Billy said. He was the meanest. I looked at Shane. He averted his eyes and said nothing. What's in the pillowcases, lovebirds? Rob asked and reached for Adair's. Candy, I said, and stepped in front of her. I was never brave. I always avoided trouble when I could, especially where the neighborhood bully club was concerned. But something stirred in me right then, and whatever fear I had was gone, if only for a few seconds. A chorus of oohs came from 3 of them. Billy stepped in front of Rob. Look at you, Jacob, standing up for your girl. Leave us alone, Billy. He smiled. It was terrifying. He poked my shoulder several times as he spoke. Little dying boy suddenly become tough. You're not afraid anymore? Come on, Billy, Shane said. That's not funny. Who says I'm joking? For the first time in years, my brother stood up for me. It's not funny. He reached for me, took me by the shoulder. Let's go home, Jacob. I didn't say he could go anywhere, Billy said. I don't care, Shane said. When Billy punched my brother, it stunned all of us. Blood spilled from his broken nose. Billy went to kick Shane, but Adair intervened. Stop. If you leave us alone, you can have all of our candy. Billy looked at Shane, then at me, then at her. Why should I listen to you? I'm taking the candy anyway. Because you won't get in trouble this way. To me, she said, give him your pillowcase. But just do it. We handed our sacks over. Billy took them, looked inside, then down at Shane. You're lucky, but this isn't over. The neighborhood bully club, -1, walked off. They laughed as they went. Shane stood. Blood covered his face and shirt. Let's go home, Jacob. No, Adair said. You go home. Shane didn't argue. He sulked off like a whipped pup. Thank you, Adair said. I didn't do anything. You protected me. I shrugged. Now let me protect you. I frowned. What do... Adair bit down on her bottom lip with fangs I thought were fake, creating 2 holes. She leaned forward, kissed me with her cold lips. Her blood filled my mouth. I swallowed it, and the cold drop that struck my stomach sent shivers through my body. See you next year, she said. I don't... She put a finger to my lips. See you next year. Okay. I woke up the next day, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel weak or exhausted. On the front porch was the pillowcase I had used for the previous 5 years. It was full of candy. If you haven't guessed by now, Billy, Rob, and Rich went missing that night and haven't been seen since. That's probably where this story could have ended, but it didn't. The next Halloween, I met her at the cemetery gates. I was completely cured of the leukemia I should have died from. It was a miracle, the doctors said. I dressed as a vampire with a powdered white face, slicked black hair, fangs, and my Sunday's best suit. She still wore the same clothes as she had when I first met her years before. The clothes had grown with her. Her hair was still kinky blonde, and those eyes were still to die for. Her beauty grew as she aged. You're a vampire, she said. And so are you. Yes. And you cured my leukemia? I had to. Why? I mean, I'm glad you did it, but why did you have to? She shrugged. Well, I love you, and I need you. You need me? Yes. She took me to the mausoleum. There, she showed me a stone vault with no body inside. I can only leave once a year on Halloween. This is where I sleep every day of every year. She looked at me with those blue eyes. I can only be released from this curse by the blood of someone who loves me. I love you. I know. We stared at each other for a long while. I smiled. She smiled. When I was 11, I offered myself to Adair. She bit the crook of my elbow and drank of my blood, which she had mixed with her own when she kissed me the year before. I became dizzy and sat on the floor. A few minutes later, she sat beside me and offered me another kiss. Again, she bit her bottom lip and created open wounds with her real fangs. Then she put her lips to mine. It was the kiss of eternal lovers. Her blood was warm this time. And that is the story of how I fell in love, beat cancer, and became a vampire, all before turning 12 years old. Okay, welcome back. This is your host, Lindsey B. Oh, great. Another interruption. If you'll excuse me just a moment, I'm just going to take this call really quickly. Hello?
Yes, is this Lindsey B. Goddard of Weird Wide Web?
Yes it is. How can I help you?
I represent the International Vampires Association. We heard you were making a special vampire podcast episode, and we are just concerned about bad representation in the press. We wouldn't want any of your stories to make our kind look monstrous.
But aren't you monsters?
We have a long and rich history for sure, but these days we are trying to blend in, and so we would not appreciate any bad PR.
Well, in our last story, the vampire cured a little boy of a life-threatening disease. Is that pretty good?
Yes, that is a good start. And for your next story?
Oh, our next story. Yeah, that might not paint vampires in such a good light.
Well then, we at the International Vampires Association would urge you not to read that story.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and read it. It's a pretty good story, so bye now. My goodness, I am about sick of vampires trying to crash our vampire party. And what a bunch of BS that was. Vampires are monsters. They will kill you, they will suck your blood, and you should fear them, much like the one in this next story by Mackey. Back from the War, a 1920s vampire tale by Mackey. It was nightfall when Bram Collinwood arrived back in town. He'd been away, fighting the Great War in Germany, thanks to the signing of the Armistice of November in 1918. The brother of the woman he'd been involved with prior to being drafted, and still was, according to the correspondence they'd shared, had died beside him in battle. And how would he tell her? His sweet Abigail. Still garbed in his army fatigues, he walked along Hartville Street and Carsters Avenue, the beige duffel bag containing his belongings slung over his right shoulder. His destination? The Silver Crest Saloon, opened in 1847. It was his favorite watering hole, after all, and he needed to be good and inebriated before he broke the tragic news to Abigail. Why, if this isn't a sight for sore eyes! The first thing he heard stepping in, delivered by the bartender and owner of the Silvercrest, Harrison Cabers, stationed behind the bar. "Welcome back, soldier." "Thanks, Harrison," Brom replied as he headed for the bar and slid onto a stool, the two of them face to face with each other. "I could use a serious drink, or four." "Yeah, I can't blame you," Harrison said. "Your usual, coming right up." And with that, he turned and headed to retrieve it. "So," there was a long pause, "will your friend be in tonight too?" The mention of Nicholas caused Brom to feel a rush of sorrow, especially knowing his next stop was to find Abigail and let her know he was back. The war was over. But how long until she asked if her brother had returned too? "Bad news, Harrison. My good buddy was an unfortunate casualty." "Now that sure is a letdown, my friend," Harrison answered as he finished filling up the mug. "Here, you're going to need this to lift your spirits." "Yeah, you'd better believe I will. It'll help me out when I break the news to Abigail." He gulped his drink eagerly. "It's going to break her heart when I do." "That's the truth. But at least she'll have you to comfort her." Harrison said as Brom chugged the beer like it was going out of style. Yeah, she will, Brom replied into his empty mug. So have you seen her today? You'll probably find her up at the Elkswood Club singing her heart out, Harrison said, as Brom slid off the stool and started for the exit. He was off to reintroduce himself to Abigail, and if luck was on his side, continue on where they had left off prior to his departure. His name was Seth Corman. The reason he made his way to this town? Revenge. For being hung for murder and receiving his death sentence by Judge Leighton Greystone. Thankfully, while he was confined to his jail cell awaiting execution, he had an actual vampire for a cellmate who had no qualms about transforming him so he would survive the awaiting hanging and deliver some payback to Judge Greystone. And he had paid him back in the worst way imaginable, ripped his throat out and did the same to his lovely wife, which left his infant son an orphan. And that wasn't where it ended, no. He'd done the same to one of Leighton's descendants each generation. Now it was Abigail's turn to suffer for her ancestors' act. His intentions for her: drag her out of the Elkswood Club and to her widowed father's ranch, where he'd have a horrific big surprise waiting for her. And with that, he smiled and journeyed on. If there was one thing Abigail Grayson loved spending her evenings engaged in, it was singing her heart out for the town citizens of Havensgate, Illinois, in the Elkswood Club. And tonight was no different. 4 months into being 19, she had big aspirations of beating it out of this town and making her way to Hollywood to become the next Mary Pickford, Lillian Gish, or Louise Brooks. Dressed in a stunning black sequin flapper dress, she certainly had the looks for it. Tall, slender, chestnut brown hair fashioned into a bob cut. There was a specific reason why she hadn't gone ahead and followed her dream so far. She was waiting for her older brother, Nicholas, off fighting the war in Germany, along with the man she was engaged to, the great love of her life, Brom Collinwood. As soon as they returned, she and Brom would go speeding off to Hollywood. She, of course, had a backup plan in case this didn't pan out. She'd try her hand on becoming a vaudeville singer. As she stood on stage, microphone inches away from her pouty lips, about to sing 2 audience favorites, Just Wild About Harry, along with And We Got Fun, Abigail's face broke out in panicked alarm with the sudden arrival of a strange new presence that filled her with dread. Whoever he was, no longer had the appearance of a human. No, instead he looked like a gargoyle, or a demon perhaps, complete with long talons instead of fingernails, bright red eyes, enormous fangs at least 3 inches in length, jutting from his mouth. He was something out of her worst nightmare, that much was sure. And the question was, what did he want? Abigail didn't have a moment longer to contemplate this. As quick as a flash, this vampire was up on the stage and standing inches away from her. He towered over her by a foot, and she could see the audience members' faces had grown plastered with uncomfortable fear over what this vampire might subject her to. She realized her fear also stemmed from the fact that becoming a vampire would also squash her Hollywood vaudeville dreams. Vampires don't get acting and singing roles. And then there was Brom and Nicholas. They would be so heartbroken and crushed if they returned from the war only to discover she had become a creature who craved blood and stalked the night. You'd better drain me bone dry and kill me, vampire, since I refuse to exist even one single day as a blood-drinking creature, she threatened in a low guttural warning. I have no intention of bestowing you with immortality. The vampire growled a deep response, and with that, he wrapped those talons tight around her forearm and yanked her closer to him. Who are you? Give me your name, vampire. Seth Corson, and your family and I have a bit of history, going back to when your ancestor condemned me to death. And he paid for it with his life, as did all of your ancestors after, ending with your dear old father. Abigail could not believe what she had just heard. that her only remaining parent had been murdered by a vampire out of revenge against the actions of an ancestor she had no idea existed. She felt a rush of sadness over it. It made her want desperately to do something, anything in retaliation against this vampire for his rendering her an orphan. Bastard vampire. He was the only parent I had left, she hissed, fire starting to develop in her eyes. I hate you to death. Her sadness transformed into rage. Even though she realized it wouldn't have any effect on the vampire or hurt him, she lifted up her hand to deliver a much-needed slap to his face. I don't take too kindly to a woman attempting to strike my face, he growled, catching her hand before she could connect with him. Now the question is, should I give the audience a real treat and allow them to watch as I transform you into a vampire? Who am I kidding? They came here to spend their evening to see you do something. Of course they should. The next thing Abigail knew, the vampire was going into action, gripping and tearing off her dress. She felt pure humiliation as the audience stared at her with unbelieving, shocked faces. So what do you think, ladies and gents? The vampire sneered. Should I transform her right here and now, or do it where she calls home? Spare us observing your feeding habits, bloodsucker, one of the male patrons cried out in response. The audience has spoken, the vampire taunted. Your transformation into vampirism shall take place on your good old homestead. And with that, Abigail found herself scooped up and flung over his shoulder, and then he was zipping off the stage and out of the club, all while he began to sprout huge bat-like wings, which made her eyes widen with pure surprise. Brom was caught by alarm as he approached the Elkswood Club and saw an actual vampire. He was by far the ugliest bloodsucker he could ever imagine. Gray-skinned like a gargoyle, tall and deathly thin, and he was about to enter the club. Brom shuddered to think about what he might do to Abigail when he caught sight of her. Was the woman he so loved and desired fated to die like her poor unfortunate brother? No. He had to do whatever it took to prevent Abigail from ending up like Nicholas. But how? He was only human after all, and no match for a monstrous vampire. Still, however, he needed to try. The woman he loved had her life at stake. Heading in a rush toward the club and following the vampire inside, Brom peeked in and saw his first act was to head straight for the stage. Sure enough, Abigail was in there, standing on the stage, and her face was dominated with absolute fear over the vampire's arrival. The thought of Abigail being bitten into and her blood taken to satisfy this vampire's hunger was way beyond a sickening scenario, and he had to do something, anything to kill this vampire and prevent it. He was well aware of how one was supposed to be killed, having read various vampire fiction in the past. Stakes and holy water were the first two things which sprang to mind of how to vanquish a vampire's life, if that's what it could be considered. Unfortunately, he had neither. What he had was a trench knife, which he removed from his bag and held ready. Disgust and rage dominated Brom, and he squeezed the knife's handle tight as the vampire embarrassed Abigail by ripping off her dress and exposed her undergarment-clad body to the audience. I swear, I'll kill you, vampire, for humiliating her like that. Then suddenly, Brom witnessed the vampire throw her over his shoulder, sprout ghastly wings, and prepare to take flight with the frightened girl. It took him only a second to realize he'd have to try and grab hold of the vampire as he flew off with Abigail for her home. It took no time for the vampire to burst out of the club, and as soon as he did, started to dart up into the sky. Not while I'm alive. You won't sink those fangs into Abigail, Brom thought fiercely and raced after the vampire. Luck was on his side as he was able to wrap his arms tight around the vampire's leg for dear life as he took off into the sky. Of course, he lost hold of his bag in the process, and it went tumbling back to the ground. As he stared up at Abigail, her face dominated with pure fear, Brom wasn't the least bit surprised to see her whisper, "I love you." It took no time for the vampire to realize he was attached to his leg, and he quickly made it known he wasn't appreciative of it. He began using his other leg to try and frantically kick him off, hitting him in his side and stomach. The blows were so painful that Brom began wondering if he should let go and risk injury by crash landing down on the hard ground below. suffer a broken bone or two, maybe more, like death. He didn't, realizing he couldn't allow Abigail to fall victim to what the vampire was intending for her. In an effort to try and put a stop to the vampire's painful kicking, Brom began to stab the knife's blade straight into the vampire's knee. It caused him to let loose with a powerful howl of furious rage. "I'll teach you to stab me," the vampire screamed as they neared the Grayson farm. They were so close to the ground that Brom could see something which caused his blood to run cold. Not only were the livestock transformed into gray-skinned vampires, but Abigail's father was now one as well. Ravenous, hungry, dangerous. Grabbing Abigail around the neck, Brom watched in full blast horror as the vampire threw her onto the ground to be drained by the vampire livestock, or, shudder the thought, her own father turned bloodsucker. "Abigail!" he screamed, releasing his hold around the vampire's leg and falling to the ground as well. The vampire continued on his way, leaving the two behind. Abigail was horrified beyond belief seeing the vampire's big surprise. He had transformed her father, along with all of their livestock, into vampires. There wouldn't be a chance they could fight off all the vampire livestock and her father, no matter how much of a great soldier Brom was. One thing she was certain about: with no sign of Nicholas anywhere to be seen with Brom, he must have been a casualty of the war. She felt a hole where her heart had been, and without any of her family alive, she didn't want to live any longer, nor did she want to follow her dream to Hollywood or vaudeville. All she wanted to do was die with Brom. "I missed you every second you were off fighting in the war, Brom," she whispered, wrapping her arms around Brom's neck as the vampire livestock and her father closed in on them from all sides to use them to satisfy their craving for blood. "Yeah, I missed you too," Brom whispered as he felt the sharp teeth of a vampire sheep sink into his leg, making him realize the end was near. "I love you," Abigail said as her father ripped her away from the embrace and bit hard into her neck, almost to the point of decapitation. The last sight Brom saw before he lapsed into unconsciousness was Abigail's father completely taking off her head. Her body collapsed to the ground, and the livestock rushed in to help themselves to her blood. Okay, welcome back. Wasn't that a great story? I think things finally calmed down around here. I swear, you even say the word vampire and they just all start bothering you like, ugh. But I haven't had anyone come to the door or calling on my phone while you were listening to that story, so we should be okay now. And
you've got mail.
Oh my, what is this? Oh, it's an email now. An email. The email address is notavampire@definitelynottavampire.com. Real clever. And the message reads as follows: "Don't you people have anything better to do with your time than to read and write despicable stories that misrepresent vampires?" Well, yes, we do. I actually have a poem to read you. It was a night unlike any other, by Rick Powell. It was a night unlike any other, the night that they first met, the lamplight reflecting off the cobblestones, in a darkened alleyway, the sun long set. He went walking alone this night, his heart full of remorse, for a love that had abandoned him. Her life had found a new course. A long way he had walked to this village, streets with no name, past houses unknown, past businesses in need of great repair, past dark, dirty windows where light is not shown. The only sounds in that dark night were of his footsteps on the damp, cold stone. Not another soul about did he peer, glad in his misery to be left all alone. He turned into an alleyway to go back the way he came, when out of the mist of the darkness he heard a soft voice whisper his name. He paused, frozen, to see who would appear, Then his gaze fell upon a shadowy form, a hooded figure still as the stone, no other sound except an oncoming storm. The figure took a few steps, silent and slow, the dark robe whispering, to arrive where he stood. A pale, slender hand touched at his sleeve, the other cold hand then pulled back the hood. A flash of lightning revealed the face of a woman so pale and fair, lips so red like dew on a rose, framing her visage, the darkest of hair. What captivated him the most was the depth of her eyes, the color indiscernible, it made his soul swoon. They were the brightest as the sun on the sea, and also the darkest as the eclipse of the moon. He meant to ask how she knew of his name, but all of his words over his tongue they did tumble. No sound at all passed over his lips, the only sound in the night, the storm's steady rumble. She seemed to sense the misery in his heart. When she slowly took him into her embrace, he felt her cold breath upon his neck, the feel of her locks upon his pale face. He felt his misery leave his tired form, like dried leaves in the October breeze. Though the pain was nothing like he could describe, the hurt could not stifle how she set his soul at ease. He felt his blood mingle with hers as she drank. With every pump of his heart, his agony did drain. Though the lightning did flash, the bolt he did not see. Though his body did drench, he felt not the rain. Now he walks these streets at night, no thoughts of past love, not thinking of woe, not of despair, agony, or strife. His home is with the darkness. He is at rest with the shadows. All gone is the pain of his past. He has found a new life. Now, with her by his side, they go searching for more, for souls who feel pain, with sorrows that smother, who go walking alone, with sadness as their guide, into the night, a night unlike any other. I loved that poem. It was really heartfelt and really deep. But what do you say we lighten the mood now? What do you say we go party? Yeah, let's go to the club and have some fun with this next story by Lori Michelle Booth. Rite of Passage by Lori Michelle Booth. Pulling into a parking space, John knew that he didn't really belong here, the neon lights illuminating the sky for miles. His reliable Toyota stood out in the lot full of high-profile sports cars. Regardless, he sighed and forced himself toward the open doors. The thumping from the bass of the music spilled out into the night and overtook John's own natural heartbeat. He was determined tonight to have a good time. He wasn't going to think with his responsible nature and would instead just let himself go. He was going to be a new man tonight, the kind of man a wife would regret leaving. He found Brad and Doug already in line. Brad clapped him on the back. "Man, we were wondering if you were going to show up. I was beginning to think we were going to have to come drag you down here." John managed a weak smile, trying to swallow his fear. He felt so out of touch, looking at all the beautiful young people around him dressed in their leather. Doug touched John on the arm. "Relax, John, it'll be fun." John nodded and took a deep breath. At least Doug wouldn't desert him on his own in this amusement park of clubs. Everyone wore black. Black pants, black boots, black hair, black lipstick. Every once in a while he got a glimpse of red or purple, but it all remained dark nonetheless. Even the name of the club, Dark Moon, was dark. He again wondered why Brad had thought this was an appropriate place for his first foray back into the dating scene. The line inched forward as the bouncer slowly granted people access. He was a well-built man wearing black leather pants and a black leather coat, even though it was 70 degrees. The shades on his face hid his eyes, and when he yawned, John was sure that he saw a set of fangs. Shaking his head slightly, He looked at Brad, who only shrugged and went, "Dude, the girls here are super hot. Trust me." John chuckled and was surprised that they had made it all the way to the bouncer. He wasn't sure he was ready for the whole dark moon experience, but he owed it to Brad and to himself as a new man to go inside for a while. After all, it was his rite of passage. He didn't have to stay all night if he really hated it. The bouncer looked over the three men with indignation before opening the door to let them in. John was hit with a deep musical resonance and a multitude of strobe lights. He blinked for a few seconds to acclimate his eyes to the darkness of the interior. The huge sunken dance floor was already full of pulsating bodies, and the small tables surrounding the perimeter were all occupied. The guys made their way up to the bar. The bartendress was, of course, dressed in all black, sporting dark curly hair piled atop her head. John was struck with how light her skin appeared, especially compared to the darkness of her clothing. He noticed how her eye color changed as she turned to look at the three of them, coming off very pale, like an almost amber color. They seemed to look right through him. "What can I get you guys?" she shouted over the music. "Coors Light," Brad said. "Same," nodded Doug. The beautiful, clear eyes settled on John. He coughed. "Same, too, I guess. I don't really know." The bartendress smiled at him, showing a surprising set of fangs. John had heard about, but had never seen, this expensive fashion fad. They had to be custom-made by specialty dentists. The bartender slid his drink across the bar. "Make sure you try one of our house specialty drinks later." John nodded, not quite sure what to say. Sure, thanks." The guys paid for their drinks and went off to find a space to watch the action. 2 sweeping staircases on either side of the bar went upstairs. John couldn't see what was up there. The decor of the place resembled that of a medieval castle. Candlelit sconces lined the walls, along with a set of skillfully crafted gargoyles hanging from the stones. The overall ambience struck John, and again he felt out of place among the youthful crowd. Brad elbowed him in the ribs and pointed to the girls on the dance floor. "Didn't I tell you the girls here were hot?" He chugged his beer. "Okay, guys, I'm going in." He placed his empty beer bottle down on the shelf and headed down the stairs to the dance floor. Instantly, he was swallowed up by the jostling crowd. Doug and John looked at each other incredulously. Doug shrugged. "That's Brad for you." John shook his head and continued to scan the crowd. He could see that there were a couple older patrons here, but they were few and far between. Occasionally, he would catch a flash of very pale eyes, like the bartendresses had been. They seemed to peer right through him. Then he saw her. Standing by the bar as if she had no care in the world, glowed the world's most gorgeous redhead. She didn't have the perfect body of a 20-year-old, but the curvy, mature body of a woman. Like John, she seemed to be scanning the club, like she didn't quite feel comfortable being here. He became very intrigued. She walked away from the bar slowly, holding a glass containing a crimson liquid. He hoped that she wasn't waiting for anyone. Doug saw John looking at the woman and leaned in. "Go over and talk to her." John looked at Doug. "You think I should?" "Yeah, why not?" "I don't know, man. Just look at her. I wouldn't know what to say to her." "Dude, relax. She's just a person. Go up and say hello." John took a deep breath, looked at Doug, who gave him an encouraging nod, and walked up to the woman. She looked up at him with the most gorgeous green eyes, and he instantly became tongue-tied. Hi." "That's the most interesting pickup line I've ever heard," she said, smiling. "I'm sorry. I'm new at this, and to be honest, I'm not sure what to say." "Well, I'll take that as a compliment. I'm Christiana, but you can call me Chrissy." "Christiana, that's beautiful. Is it a family name?" "It's been around a long time, so I guess you could say that. And you are?" "Oh, sorry, John. Not as pretty or exciting as your name." "It's a good, solid name. I've never seen you around here before. Are you new to the area?" "No, just new to the bar scene." "What?" "The bar scene! I'm new to it!" he shouted over the crowd. "Really?" She turned to the bar. "Hey, Anna, we're going upstairs. Send up another round in about 10 minutes. The bartendress nodded her head as she continued to mix drinks for the other customers. Come on, Chrissy told John. There's a place upstairs where we can have a conversation without screaming. John, shocked that this beautiful woman was even speaking to him, could only nod his head numbly. He glanced around, looking for either Doug or Brad, but didn't see them. He followed her up one of the elaborate staircases and was surprised to find that the upstairs was mostly empty and a lot less noisy. John tried not to stare as Christiana walked. She exhibited an elegance and grace normally reserved for ballerinas. It was almost as if she glided across the floor. She sat down at one of the tables and gestured for him to take the other chair. I'm sorry, he said, sitting. I should have gotten a chair for you. She laughed. That's okay. Chivalry is long dead. So tell me about you. What do you do for a living? What do you like to do for fun, and what brings you here tonight? He shrugged. I'm not that interesting. I work in insurance. I don't have any hobbies that I can think of, and I'm here because my friends told me that it was the right of a newly divorced man to come out and party. Newly divorced, huh? Any kids? No, I wish I had, but it wasn't meant to be. She smiled at him. Having children and providing for them is a huge responsibility, but it does come with huge rewards. Yeah, my ex-wife never wanted kids. To be honest, I think she was too self-centered for them anyway, he said. But enough about her, let's talk about you. You have got to be more interesting than I am. I do what it takes to survive. I'm a single mother, so I don't have time for many hobbies, and I only come here once in a while because my friend, Anastasia, you know, the one mixing drinks, owns this bar. I really don't feel like I fit in here. He looked around. I understand the feeling. This place makes me feel so old. Everyone here is so young and hip. Appearances are seldom what they seem, she said. The waitress approached with another beer and red-colored drink. Anna said to bring these to you. Thanks, Morgan. The waitress smiled, revealing a set of fangs. Anytime, Chrissy. Christiana took a sip of the red drink. Damn, Anna makes the best Bloody Mary. John eyed her. So how do you fit in here? You don't seem like the others here. Christiana laughed. I'm not like the others here. I told you, I'm just good friends with the owner, Anna. She really helped me through a rough patch one time, so I come here just for a quick drink every once in a while. As a matter of fact, you are the first interesting person I have ever met here. He blushed, cleared his throat, and switched subjects. So you say you're a single mother. That must be rough. Christiana looked surprised at the change of subject. It was hard at first, but then you get used to it. And Darla is a good kid, so that makes it easier. That child is my life, and I would do anything for her. Are you divorced? No, my husband died a while back. He was trying to defend Darla. She looked away quickly, and John could see the tears forming. I am so sorry to hear that. It must have been very painful. He reached across the table to take her hand. She looked up at him and smiled. Sorry, it's just a little hard to think about. It is what it is, she murmured. Then, raising her voice, Hey, in a little while, this place is going to be packed and the crowd is going to get unruly. And I've got a babysitter to pay. And a child I really want to get home to. So what I'm saying is, would you like to continue this conversation at my place? John looked around and was surprised to see that in the short time he had been sitting here, the room had filled with people. He turned back toward her. Are you sure? Sure. I like talking to you. You're different than most, she said. Okay, let me tell my buddies that I'm leaving. I don't want them to think I've fallen into a hole or anything. They stood up and John took Christiana by the hand. It felt good to have her by his side. They made their way down the stairs and John began to look for Doug and Brad. He found Doug first, talking to a brunette. Hey, Doug, Chrissy and I are going to get out of here. Hey, man, no problem. Doug winked at him. Have a good time. See you later. John turned to take Christiana by the hand again. They walked out the door and she waved goodbye to Anna. He leaned down to whisper in her ear, Your friend Anna really gets into all this vampire stuff, doesn't she? Christiana just nodded. It helps bring in the crowd. Once they got outside, she turned to him. Is it okay if we take your car? I can come back tomorrow for mine. Sure, he said amicably. He walked her to his car and opened the door for her. Well, maybe chivalry isn't dead after all, she commented. He got into the car and they drove toward her house on the far side of town, chatting about a variety of subjects, finding out that they had similar tastes in music and movies. He was really beginning to feel comfortable with her, and he felt their mutual attraction. They got to her house and Chrissy paid the babysitter, who left. John felt strangely at home, and an aura of pleasantness washed over him. He smiled at the good feeling. It was obvious from all the pictures that Chrissy doted on her child. He studied the pictures of a little girl who was about 3, her gorgeous curly hair and her bright smile so reminiscent of the lovely lady who was standing by the stereo. Chrissy turned on some soft jazz and started swaying her hips as she poured him a glass of wine. He watched as her body rhythmically moved from side to side. He walked up to her. "May I have this dance?" Smiling, she turned and took his embrace. Slowly they moved to the music. She fit into his arms nicely, and they moved well together. It had been a long time since John had held a woman this close. The music ended and she backed away. He bowed deeply, causing them both to giggle. She grabbed his glass of wine and sat down on the couch. He joined her, taking the glass from her and sipping its exotic taste. "Am I the only one drinking?" he asked. "I've had enough, and I have a child to be responsible for, but you go ahead." He took another sip of the wine and then set it down on the coffee table. "I can see where your child gets her beauty from." Chrissy laughed, waving her arm. "Oh, please. Flattery will get you everywhere. You want to see pictures of her as a baby?" "Of course." She jumped up and got a photo album off the shelf of the bookcase in the corner. She eagerly opened it and turned to a page of an infant. He flipped through the family memories, noting that the baby had much darker eyes than her mother. He looked up and caught the gaze of Chrissy's pale green eyes. She was looking at him as if studying him. "I'm not in the habit, you know," she said. He looked at her, trying to stifle a yawn. He didn't know where that came from. "The habit of what?" "Inviting strange men over to my house." "But you're different than the other guys I have met," she said. "Most of them don't care about me or my daughter. I find myself very attracted to you." "You're a lovely woman," he told her, "and any man would be lucky to be graced with your presence." He leaned toward her and she reciprocated, their lips touching briefly. She leaned in, and their kiss grew deeper. John felt himself become instantly aroused, but he also found himself growing tired. So tired. He backed up, bewildered, Christiana smiling. "Sleep, John. Go to sleep." Christiana watched the man stir and was glad she had gotten him tied up before he awoke. She didn't like having to drug them, but she was a small woman who would not have been able to restrain him while he was conscious. She hated that she had to do this to him. He was so different than the rest. He mumbled, pulling at the restraints in confusion as he came to. She turned on the side lamp. "Did you have a good sleep, John?" she purred. He yawned deeply and then noticed his bonds. "Why am I tied up? What is this? Are you robbing me?" "No," she said simply. "I have other plans for you." Chrissy got up and walked to the door. "Darla, darling, come in here, please." A beautiful little girl walked into the bedroom. Her hair was a halo of light red curls, and her eyes were almost clear. She smiled a childlike grin at him and revealed a set of hideously sharp teeth. "What the fuck is this?" John demanded. "This is my daughter, and you will watch your mouth around her." "What?" "Listen, I know you might be scared, and you have every right to be. Try to find solace in the fact that there is nothing you could have done differently to prevent this." "Dear God, what the hell are you talking about?" Christiana put her hand on her daughter's shoulder. 2 years ago, I came home to find one of them had killed my husband and had turned my little girl. I was left alone to deal with a vampire child on my own. I have done what I can over the years to take care of her. Anna has helped a lot. It hasn't been easy, and I've learned that I'm capable of a lot of things that I could never have imagined before. Darla is my baby. If you had children, you'd understand. "Oh God, please don't hurt me," John moaned. Christiana stuffed a gag in his mouth to suppress the man's wailing. "Shh, John, calm down. It'll be over soon." The little girl had crept up to John and had her mouth open, salivating in anticipation. Chrissy whispered to her, "Be polite, Darla. Give him some time to get ready." "Bitch," he mumbled through the gag. Christiana removed it. "Excuse me? Why did you bring me here, you stupid bitch?" Christiana ignored him, shoved the gag back in his mouth, and touched John on the neck, feeling his pulse race. "Okay, Darla, he's ready now." The little girl sank her canines down into his throat as he released a muffled, piercing shriek. Christiana backed away, turning her head from the massacre that was about to occur. "I'm sorry, John," she said, "but my little girl has to eat." Wow. Laurie Michelle Booth, what a great story, and thank you for letting me read that. That was our second vampire story with a small child in it. Kind of makes you wonder why nobody does Grampire, like a really old vampire. Anyway, I've got one more vampire surprise for you tonight. As you can tell by some of the things that went on during this podcast, you can't trust a vampire. In fact, a long time ago, I actually wrote a story called Never Trust a Vampire. But that's not what I'm going to read for you right now. Because right now, I want to read for you a short poem that I wrote. Poser by Lindsey Goddard. She longed to sleep inside a coffin, be a child of the night. She waited her whole life for that one immortal bite. Till one night she met a stranger who promised her that dream, followed him into an alley, and heard a banshee scream. Never did two piercing fangs ever penetrate her skin. The stranger's hands squeezed round her neck, his fingers digging in. And now she sleeps inside a coffin, yet never will she wake, for the vampire who took her life was nothing but a fake. So there you go, guys. You can't trust vampires, and you can't trust humans either. Never trust the living, never trust the dead, never trust the undead. And I'll leave you with that until vampire episode number 2, where I'm going to bring you a lot more vampire stories. See you next time, guys.